Hello, I'm Father Mitch Packel. Welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all over the world. Tonight, we are going to talk about one of the most enduring heresies of the church and one of the earliest heresies of the church. It is called Gnosticism. A lot of you may even have heard about it through various novels and other falsehoods about it. Joining us tonight to discuss Gnosticism is the producer of a new television series on EWTN. This series is going to be called The Heresies, which will tackle a different heresy each month. It premieres later tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Matter of fact, let's take a look at a clip right now.
Since its founding by Jesus Christ over 2,000 years ago, the Catholic Church has faced attacks. Numerous hostile governments, tyrannical regimes, and revolutionary movements have sought to destroy the Catholic Church from without. But the greater threat has always been from within. In every generation, the Church has contended with heretics over questions concerning the very essence of the religion.
A heresy really caters to popularity. Heresies thrive on their attractiveness. People say, well, that makes sense to me. But the question is it the truth of God?
In this series, we're going to look at the great heresies. We'll see that the ideological struggles of the past are anything but fossilized subjects, but rather living temptations with which the Church must contend again and again.
Heresies never really go away. The ideas that are attractive to people in the 1st and 2nd century still seem to have a lot of attraction for people today.
Along the way, we'll see how the doctrines of the Church developed and gained clarity in the Church's struggle with heretics, and we'll gain a deeper awareness about what's at stake today. We'll explore all this and more on The Heresies.
All right. Joining us now via Skype is the producer of the Heresies series. Please welcome Mr. Tim Moriarty. Tim?
It's great to be here, Father. Thanks so much for having me.
It is so good to have you here, too. I loved this program that you did, but I have an initial question. Why are you doing this program on heresies?
Well, you know, it's been something of interest to me for quite some time. So I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a theologian or a philosopher, but it's something that I've always been very interested in, how the church became the church we have today. And what were the different ideological struggles that the church had to contend with? What were the different interpretations of Christianity that the church had to deal with? And learning about the Nicene Creed, for instance, how much of that comes out of struggles with ideas of the past. Mm-hmm. One quote I've always found very interesting was George Santayana, who says that failure to remember the past sort of dooms one to repeat these mistakes of the past. And so I think when we understand the past, we tend to have a better understanding of different ideas that come and go through history. We're less inclined to say, oh wow, this is a new idea, this has never been tried before. When we have that understanding of the past, we can say, oh, we've seen this before. This is familiar territory. And so I think it's very vital for us today. We kind of live in a time of historical amnesia, as it were. So to go through sort of systematically some of the great heresies of the past can help us today to discern where are they present in our culture. I mean, that to me is the most interesting part of this series, is not only where they manifest themselves in the past, but where we see them today.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I notice happening on a regular basis, now we get a number of people coming door to door to promote their religion, their church and such. And I had a group of Sabellian heretics show
Wow.
up. Yeah, see, Sabellianism is very, very much alive. Are you going to do a show on that too?
I'd like to. We'll see. We'll have to talk. We'll have to talk with EWTN and see if we could.
Let
That
me
would
know
be,
who I
yeah,
have to put a little muscle on. We'll get some of my boys from Chicago or Texas, whichever
That'd be
one I can
great.
get a hold of first, and put
That'd
some
be
muscle
excellent.
to do that because it's been revived. And a lot of these folks think, oh, I just figured out the Blessed Trinity. Jesus is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So I got the one and the three. Oh, it's all done. It's all set. Yay. And they don't realize the truth of the book of Ecclesiastes. When Ecclesiastes wrote, Ein kol chadash tachat hashamesh. There's nothing new under the sun. And this revival of an ancient heresy is permeating parts of the church, especially among various Pentecostals. It's very common.
Yeah.
I made
Where
friends,
do you see?
I was
I'm
gonna say, I
curious, where
made
do you
friends
see
with a Greek Orthodox priest from Jordan. He's Arabic. And he said to me, Abuna, for why? All these churches, they are going back to Sabellian heresy. It was dead. They brought it back. You know, this is, he was just shocked, but I explained to him. But go ahead, Tim.
I'm curious where you see some of the of the different heresies. What do you see today? Where do you see most prevalent? So you mentioned Sabellianism. I'm just curious in terms of your own encounters with different Christians in different groups. Which heresies would you say today are most prevalent? I know you wrote a book a while back on Catholics in the New Age.
Yes.
I'm just very curious about which ones would you point to as the most?
The four heresies I see most commonly are first, again, among Pentecostals of various kinds, not all, but some of the Pentecostal denominations, the Jesus-only movement, which is Sabellianism. Second is the denial of Christ's divinity in various forms, especially Jehovah's Witnesses, but also among many liberal Catholics and Protestants. The denial of Christ's divinity is very common. Third, I would also point to the belief that you save yourself by your own good works. And oftentimes it's not up front, it's crypto, it's hidden, but it's lurking in the background. That's especially, again, among liberal Protestants and liberal Catholics. And then finally, Gnosticism, which showed up in various forms in the New Age movement, but also in a wide variety of others, foolishness, such as the Da Vinci Code and other nonsense. Those are the four main ones I see.
Would you see the two middle ones where the denial of Christ's divinity, is that a modern form of Arianism, would you say?
That's, well, yes,
and the
sure.
other-
They're
yeah.
very, I mean, it's not looking to Arius himself. That's why I didn't use his name, but it is Arianism. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus is the Archangel Michael. And, but other people just deny that he's divine. He's just a human being who is very intelligent. So there's variations on it. Some are like
Right.
more, closer to Arius, some are not quite. They're just don't believe in Christ's divinity. While the belief that you can save yourself by your own efforts, Pelagianism, is sometimes very explicit. Explicitly goes back to him. So, for instance, a one-time very popular writer, Matthew Fox, formerly a Dominican, was explicitly promoting Pelagius. He wrote about what a great hero he was, while other people are just crypto-Pelagians. They just have, I saw this in the 60s when I was in seminary, in high school and then in the society, that a number of folks would talk about my efforts to help the poor are more important than going to Mass, et cetera. So those are fairly common, But again, they vary in specific forms, from explicit to implicit.
I think it's fascinating. In your book, I'm curious too. Maybe we could talk later about how you see. So when did you write Catholics in the New Age? This was in the early 90s?
Yes, 92.
92. I'm curious how you see now and then, what has it been? In the time since the early 90s, how you've seen the New Age. Has it changed much? Is it pretty much the same old story, or where do you see this still prevalent today?
No, what I would see with the New Age movement, back in the 80s, when it was just coming into its own, and it seemed like this huge, and it was a huge wave, just on the basis of the billions of dollars spent on New Age books and practices, billions, and the many, many multimillionaires that it made. But then it also, those millionaires tended to lose everything. It was, and what I see going on, and that's an indicator, the New Age showed itself constantly to be dumber than a box of rocks. That it made all these claims for being what's going to alienate, it's going to end violence, it's going to end global war, it's going to be the basis of a new society, a new age in which everybody is believing in this stuff, and it failed. And the specific techniques failed. One of the ones I especially focused on, did a lot of research on the use of the Enneagram as a personality analysis type system. It was just so dumb and superficial and based on false claims. It was just, they were making this all up. And it collapsed on under its own weight. And this happened with spirit channeling and all that. So for the most part, the New Age movement collapsed as any kind of an economic force. But people will still hold on to a few of the dumb ideas like astrology, which has been a constant in a lot of Western history. They'll still hold on to something that dumb, but in the background, they don't really know what it's about. They know the superficialities they read in the newspaper horoscopes, but that's about it. So and in general, it's all pretty much faded as a movement, but there are traces of it, sort of like an empty perfume bottle. There's no perfume left, but you can still smell it if you open up the cap.
How did you get to the place where, I know in your book you mentioned how in the course of your formation, this was quite prevalent. I was curious, in your own journey, when you, was it a slow process where you realized that this was not in harmony with the Catholic faith, or was it sort of a one day you woke up and realized this was something totally separate from orthodoxy? I'm curious how, because I think for a lot of people, spirituality is attractive in different techniques and different methods that came into the culture. I'm just curious in your own sense of that. Was it a kind of
I can
one
tell you
moment, or was it a gradual?
It was very simple. My Jesuit education, it taught me to keep looking into something. When something looks good, you continue to research. And I did with the Enneagram, with astrology, with Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychologist. I would keep going and reading more and more, and then I said, that emperor is buck naked. There's nothing there. And that happened every time. So it was just having good Jesuit training and applying it to these areas as they showed up and showing that it was false. And in many ways, as I could see the falsehood of that, I recognized that falsehood back in 72, 73, I was already researching this, and I was reading a lot of Carl Jung, but I began to see, oh, this is fake, and so on. And I was fascinated with it, but I saw, nope, this guy is wrong.
Yeah.
Because he was a Gnostic. As a matter of fact, this is one of the things we should talk about with this series. But Jung was a Gnostic. And
did you read his correspondence with Father Victor White? Was that something that you looked at?
No, I looked at his autobiography, and then also looked at the things that I read. Volume 9 of his collected works and volume 2. I went into the stuff, where he was talking about scripture, my own field, and I began to see this guy's making this up, and this has nothing to do with anything. And I saw a lot of folks nodding their head, oh yeah, this is right. But I said, wait a minute, did you read it? No, I just heard the idea presented, and I read it. And the same thing with Gurdjieff, the one who was the alleged founder of the Enneagram. I read all his books, and I kept reading more, and I found out this was all nonsense. So it's that kind of research. And in one sense, when I went to theology in '74, of course we had a course in patristics, very fine course from a Yale grad who had done great work. And I could see that the work of Saint Irenaeus against the heresies, where he did the same thing. He investigated the Gnostics. He looked into what they saw, and he did not set up straw enemies, fake enemies. He set up the real case by looking at their writings, understanding them, and saying, this is why you all cannot agree amongst yourselves, even though you claim to have true knowledge based on experience. In fact, you are making this up. And I saw the same process with the New Age movement, and came to have a great admiration for Saint Irenaeus of Lyon. He's a character, by the way, that you bring up in your special, your documentary.
We do. Yeah, his sense of him, Saint Irenaeus, being under the tutelage of Polycarp, who learned the faith from Saint John, and so this sense of the apostolic tradition and this deposit of faith that is passed on, and that lineage, his understanding of the tradition, allowing him to then be able to say, no, this isn't quite right. This is not what we have received from Christ. And also the sense of the faith being public. I had heard somewhere that Pope Benedict gave one of his Wednesday addresses where he spoke of Irenaeus, and he spoke about Irenaeus's emphasis on the public nature, where it's public theology, as opposed to what we see in Gnosticism as an emphasis on secret knowledge. So the idea in Gnosticism, I think, of the past and of present day, is the idea that there is what is called an exoteric teaching, which is kind of for the hoi polloi and the masses. But then there's the esoteric, which different Gnostic sects of the past had kind of various systems, but that one of the ideas would be that Jesus sort of would take his disciples aside and whisper what all of this stuff really meant. And so there's the secret tradition that sort of would carry on, and you would be initiated into this secret knowledge. So I think that we see that quite a bit in the New Age as well. This business of
Absolutely.
We know the truth that nobody else quite knows, and you can become part of our club to get these these secret techniques or these secret wisdom, which then can allow you to free your mind or free your consciousness. So there's definitely a kind of a continuity between the two movements.
As a matter of fact, that was especially true among the New Agers who were consulting spirits. That when they were spirit channeling, they were the ones who most claimed to have the esoteric knowledge, that special inner knowledge, and other people had the exoteric, the outside knowledge, but they had the real stuff. I'd like us to take a look at a clip from your documentary on Gnosticism that helps to define what it is. Let's take a look at a quick clip.
Just who were these Gnostics? And why did they bury their scriptures in remote caves? Do they, as some popular books and films would have us believe, represent the authentic and true teachings of Jesus, which the institutional church has concealed for centuries?
When we're talking about Gnosticism, we're talking about a big and sometimes rather slippery or ambiguous label. Most generally defined, we're talking about a religious movement that we can trace to the early Christian centuries, which tends to regard our salvation as coming through gnosis, or some kind of knowledge, especially a kind of secret knowledge.
If heresies in general are partial truth, a bit of the whole, what you have in Gnosticism is really is not so much a single heresy, but a whole system of heresies. It's an attempt to accomplish, in a way, everything that Christianity accomplishes through borrowing all sorts of elements from Christianity, from this great revelation and great tradition, but on very different terms.
And that, what they just said about the Gnostics borrowing from Christianity, but giving it this false perspective, was exactly true of the spirit channelers among the New Age movement people, because they always brought Jesus into their revelations. Course in Miracles, the Church Universal and Triumphant, Metatron, all these different spirits, brought in Jesus. But it was never, ever, ever the Jesus of the Gospels. It was a Jesus who contradicted the Gospels, and they would say, what the Gospel writers wrote was a front, but we're giving you the real Jesus. And it never was the real Jesus. It was always a fake.
Well, I think what's interesting is the key idea in Gnosticism is this notion of salvation via gnosis or gnosis, the Greek word for knowing. And so it's very different from the idea of salvation through faith. And for the Gnostic, the whole sense of it is that there's the radical duality that the world is created, according to some of these groups, by a sort of lower God, a kind of demiurge, and the true self, the deep, true spiritual self, is in a way there's the divine spark that's stuck inside of us. And so salvation is a kind of prison break almost. Once you have the knowledge of who you truly are, in a way you can escape the limitations of physical, material reality, which to them is evil. And so I think what we see in various New Age movements as well is a focus on a kind of enlightenment of the mind, a kind of expansion of consciousness, a kind of spirit that's deep down inside. But it seems to, from the Orthodox perspective, discount our bodies. It discounts the sacramental nature of the body, the sense of God creating the world, and so the world itself being an icon or an image of God's self. And so that use of Jesus in that way is very contrary to the Orthodox idea of the resurrection of the body, the idea of God, the good God creating the world, and God saying this is good. So these are things that are perennial kind of temptations which will reemerge. And I don't think it's an accident that we see these spiritual movements arising at a time when perhaps post-Descartes, post-modernity, when the physical material world becomes meaningless in a way. We have this split in Descartes between what he calls the res cogitans, the thinking self, and res extensa. There's a split between my spiritual self and the material world that's sort of indifferent to me. And so out of that split, when we no longer see the body as informative, we retreat deeply inside to find the deep down me that's in there, the spark of the divine, to then escape to the spiritual realm. So there's a great deal of similarities, I think, between the ancient world and a very destabilized almost frightening world where you see the brutality, the fall of the Roman Empire, or as well, not quite the fall yet, but a sort of destabilized world where you want to find some kind of security. And it's very easy to say, well, this world, social structures, communities, they don't mean, we can discount all of that. It's all evil, it's all meaningless. Let me retreat inside with my secret group of friends over here, and we know the truth. It's almost a psychological impulse to try to find some security, some truth in the midst of a confusing system. So I absolutely see a parallel, and it's something I think for us to be aware of, especially today as the world is quite destabilized. We don't live in the ordered cosmos of the Greeks. We don't live in the sense of we're at home in the world. We feel oftentimes very alienated, and out of that comes a very introverted type of spirituality that discounts the sacraments, that discounts the community of believers.
And a couple things I would just say as a comment on that. We feel this kind of disjuncture, this uncomfortableness in the modern world because so many wicked ideas have come into play. National Socialism with its racist component under Adolf Hitler. That was an evil set of ideas. And then the evil of Marxism that led to more deaths than National Socialism did because of evil ideas. So we find that in lots of different levels. But one of the things that you do in this documentary that I think is very key is give a careful presentation of the background to Gnosticism. You look correctly to the influence of Greek philosophy on the way certain people filtered little bits that they knew about Christianity, but the basis of their doctrine was Greek philosophy, and the gospel was a few add-on ideas that they tossed in there, but they were not based on faith in the gospel. They were based on trusting Greek philosophy. You present that very nicely in this picture.
Well, I think it's interesting. I myself, I'm not I've studied philosophy, but I'm not a philosopher. So I wouldn't be willing to say that Plato himself was a dualist, but there's no question. So, for instance, in the Nag Hammadi find in 1945,
explain what that is. Explain what Nag Hammadi is.
Until the mid-1940s, most of our knowledge of Gnosticism came through the writings of the Church Fathers against the Gnostics. And so there was a kind of mystery about what did they really believe. In 1945, there were 2 Egyptian farmers that came upon 13 leather-bound papyrus codices. And I think there was something like 50, I don't know the exact number, something like 50 different Gnostic texts, different Gospels. The Gospel of Thomas, which is very popular among different Gnostic circles, was one of these. But they also found Plato's Republic. And it's very interesting that they found Plato's Republic because in that text, he offers the allegory of the cave, which you can interpret it in a very Gnostic way. And essentially, Plato posits this myth, this story of the human being trapped in a cave, and he's looking at a wall, and behind him is a great fire. And a number of people come in between the people who are chained looking at the wall and this fire, and there's different sort of objects, almost like a puppet show. And people are looking at the wall, and they're thinking what they're seeing is the real reality, but they're seeing shadows. And then, at some point, one of the prisoners is able to escape, and in a way, he's dragged out of the cave into the sunlight, and it takes him a while for his eyes to adjust, but then he realizes this is the real world, this is the real reality. So then he tries to go back down into the cave to tell the other prisoners, but the other prisoners don't want to hear it. And in a way, you can interpret this in a very Gnostic way, in the sense that everything we encounter, our bodies, the material world, is a kind of illusion. It's almost as if, similar to the Buddhist idea of Maya, everything is an illusion. We're stuck in this wheel of samsara. And so the point of salvation is a kind of escape. We want to escape to the true reality. And then once we do, we realize that this is all an illusion. And that is something that I think a lot of the Gnostics interpreted Christianity that way. It's almost as if Jesus was a Gnostic teacher. He didn't come to save humanity from their sins. He came as almost a spy from the true God who is separated from this mundane, evil world. He came as a spy to almost whisper in our ears and tell us how we can escape. There's a great story, actually, that really illuminates some of this. The Scythians were, they were kind of a form of Jewish Gnosticism. And what they do, this is an example of how they used Christian and Jewish scriptures for their own purposes. They see the gospel, they see the story of Genesis, the Adam and Eve story, and they completely reinterpret it. For them, Adam and Eve are put into the garden by an evil God. In a way, they're trapped there in ignorance. And the snake, the serpent, is the emissary from the true God who comes to whisper and give Adam and Eve secret knowledge so that they can be like God and escape. So that's an example of how you see, in a way, the same story, but with a radically different interpretation. And it was very confusing, I think, in the early church for people who saw the same Christian stories, but they were interpreted in different ways in this sort of, this elite, sort of arrogant kind of way that we know what these stories really mean. Everybody else may have this kind of exoteric understanding, but we know what the story really means. So that, I think, is very, very true. This use of Greek philosophy to reinterpret the Christian story as a kind of myth for their own philosophy of gnosis.
Well, one of the things also when you read more about the Scythians is that they also make Cain the hero, Abel is the bad guy. Abraham and Lot are the bad guys, but the men of Sodom who wanted to rape the angels are the good guys. And they do this throughout. Anybody who is on the side of the Lord God who created everything is a bad guy because they're in favor of the material world, while the other people who oppose God are the good guys. It's a complete reversal. And when we look at a lot of today's headlines about who is the good guy and who is the bad guy, and the way some of these are being reversed, we can see that it's not too different. Elitist, snobbish people are redefining who's good and bad. And the people for God are the bad guys. The people against God and traditional morality are the good guys. Now look, Pat, we have to take a break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. I want to continue on and talk about more of modern approaches to Gnosticism. So everybody stay with us. Right, we are speaking to Tim Moriarty, who produced a wonderful documentary in a series called The Heresies. And the first episode that we're going to be showing tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Time and Thursday, June 11th at 3:30 and 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. This is on Gnosticism. And you can also get DVD copies of this. This is a very important thing to understand. It's an area that, Tim and his crew have made very clear and very richly done. It's not superficial. This is a nicely done and serious presentation of a topic. And you can get a copy of the DVD at EWTNRC.com, our religious catalog, EWTNRC.com. It is item number HDTHG. Tim, Gnosticism is not only of interest in ancient times. Again, we started off talking about how the old heresies keep coming back. They keep returning. And Gnosticism is one of those. I'd like us to take a look at a clip about modern Gnosticism and then discuss it, okay?
Sounds good.
Let's take a look
Looks
at it.
very much like Gnosticism. And I think it's very disposed to following this kind of an ersatz Christianity. In the modern dualisms, you don't necessarily find an evil God who creates the material world and so forth, but the pattern still is quite similar. And here, the material world is, rather than being evil, it's empty, it's meaningless, it's opaque. So similarly with ancient Gnosticism, it doesn't reveal anything, it doesn't convey anything. It's not a manifestation of the divine goodness or the divine generosity. Instead, it's simply dead stuff. And as dead stuff is completely alien to us as persons. And so we feel the material world as a kind of an affront. And that's something like being a victim of the evil of matter. And so our salvation is something quite similar. We turn to a pure inward interiority. We think of the person as a ghost in the machine. And the reason that's interesting is, first of all, we see the material world is a machine. It's something that's not meaningful in itself. It's mechanical matter accidentally thrown together. But at the same time, we see that the soul has turned into a ghost. It's no longer the form of the body, which is the classical Christian understanding. Instead, it's been severed from the body, the soul has. And there, it's empty. It's pure power.
Something that's very important to see how there is this modern form of Gnosticism. And I'd like to make an application for today, because among Gnostics who thought that the material world was evil, it was just an evil, made by an evil God, and that the physical world is evil. One group of Gnostics in ancient times became very ascetic. They would not enjoy anything. They made nasty food for themselves, simple food with no flavor. There's some countries that make that kind of food still. And this is something that they would have, especially when they're influenced by Jansenism, but they have nasty food and no pleasure. Any pleasure is sinful. That was one group. Another group of Gnostics said the body is irrelevant and you can do anything you want, and they had orgies. So they went all the way from orgies, because the body is irrelevant, to the experience of complete asceticism. That applies today in many ways, I think. There are folks on both sides. Because of global warming, you cannot enjoy the world and food and all that stuff. But then on the other hand, some people say, no, you just got, it doesn't matter what you do, orgies and still are, as we've seen in the Me Too movement, these have been prevalent in parts of the culture, among the elites.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what happens when you split the spirit from the body, those are your two options. It's either you need to get rid of the body, you need to deny the body. In fact, even having children is, in a way, is perpetuating this evil situation that we're stuck in. So why would you have children? This is evil. Or if the spirit has nothing to do with the body, I might as well do whatever I want to do with my body because it doesn't affect my spirit. My spirit is totally separate. So if even to give somebody a hug or to shake somebody's hand, it's not me that's doing it. It's this apparatus that I sort of bump into somebody, but my spirit inside, I could be saying, a nasty word about somebody, but smiling and all this. there's a split between what I do with my body. I think the orthodox position would be what I do with my body, I do. My body and my soul. This is why we have the resurrection of the body, at the end of time. It's the body is constitutive of what it is to be a human being, and the Christ's suffering on the cross is another example. His physical suffering matters. Matter matters. So I think you're exactly right. This has tremendous implications for morality, and it is a very sort of bipolar kind of moral paradigm that we live in today.
Exactly.
It's very, very true.
Yeah,
and I think the answer to that is Irenaeus's. He'll return us to the incarnation. He's very much about the body. The body matters, and I think that in a way, Gnosticism it splits these two things that we need to keep together. It's Christ on the cross, holding the two things together. We're not just our bodies, then we're just materialists. We're not just spirit, or we can do whatever we want. It becomes just a powerful matter of our will to exert our will on this dead material stuff. It's holding those two together, and that's the genius, I think, of orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm. And where you see that one of the criticisms of modernity against the church is that we take sexual morality seriously precisely because we take the body and soul union seriously. That you give your word to your spouse and you keep it then. You make a commitment with your mind and your words and your body, so that adultery matters, fornication matters, pornography matters, along with respecting property, along with telling the truth in court, and all the other commandments, honoring our parents. All of these different expressions of bodiliness and spirit is part of the totality of morals. And we want integration of our spiritual life, our moral life, and our physical life. All of this is to be increasingly integrated, while Gnosticism wants to isolate each part of life into its own little compartment, so that my politics has nothing to do with my morality. We have lots of Catholic politicians. This is what the Supreme Court makes legal. This is politics. It has nothing to do. My Catholic faith is here, but my morality is here. And that disjuncture fits this crypto-Gnostic background that denies the reality of the body.
I think that's right. I think the way you said it is great. It's a compartmentalization of reality. It's which is rooted in this split. And so sometimes the church gets criticized for being anti-body or anti-sexuality, but it's in fact, I think, as Pope St. John Paul II emphasizes, it's that no, we actually see the body as meaningful, ultimately meaningful. It's a sacramental expression of a metaphysical realities. It's an expression of the Trinity, in fact. And so to see the body in that light, rather than a kind of a randomness, a kind of accident, and the true self is somehow inside me that has nothing to do with the body that I've come into the world with, that I've been given with, that is very, very much part of the Gnostic paradigm. My true self is in here, and the way we interact with society, as you say, politics, the way we interact with our families, the sacramental of participating in Mass with a physical community, taking the elements of the sacraments, all of this is a very integrated worldview that the Church needs to, I think, proudly proclaim that, to work against this, as you say, this cryptic Gnosticism that we've kind of accepted as true. But in examining these ancient heresies, we start to see, oh my goodness, there it is. There it is. This is the same thing, just come around again. So I think it is that integrated vision of the body, the soul, the spirit that defenders of orthodoxy have been preaching since the earliest times.
Yeah. And I think the other part of orthodoxy, I find this series, by the way, fascinating because G.K. Chesterton had written a book called Heretics. And then, after criticizing all the modern heresies that he saw around him in early 20th century England especially, people said, well, what do you believe? And that was many years later that he wrote the book Orthodoxy. And this is where we have to keep a similar balance. That while it's important to point out the errors of the heresies, in this case of Gnosticism, the denial of nature, of the physical world, and the fake promotion of the spirit that you're just making up for your own worldview and oftentimes power play. We also have to promote what is orthodox faith. And, and we can see this, for instance, in the church's willingness to address practically every kind of issue in the world. It was Jesuit and Dominican priests who came up with the very basic theories of capitalism 100 years before Adam Smith. They wrote it in Latin, so they're not so well known as Adam Smith. But he used them to write it because, and the church, with its social encyclicals, has addressed economics because it's important. And all the other moral issues. We're concerned with everything in the world, and that's where we are anti-Gnostic.
I think that's very true. I think maybe two responses to that. One is with the Chesterton exploring heresies. One of the things that I found for myself personally is to see there's a kind of there's ways in which these ideas can get into your own system because they're in the air. So it's not really a matter of it's not just scolding others. It's seeing where are these things in me? Where have I prioritized spirit over body? So that's just one thought I've had in terms of working on this and looking at the material. It's been a little bit of a look at myself. Where do these ideas sit in me? I mean, I think all of us in some ways are conditioned by our age and their blind spots. But the second piece that you'd mentioned, there was a political philosopher, Eric Voegelin, who talked about, he saw modern politics in a way as a kind of form of Gnosticism that's totally split off this dualistic split between this pure immanent world that we live in and the transcendent. But now we don't even talk about the transcendent. Everything is just this immanent realm. And so the eschaton, the sense of the end, the teleological fulfillment that the Catholic faith will talk about, the new heavens and the new earth. We don't talk about that anymore. It becomes a purely immanentized kind of utopian vision that we see in our politics. And it does a lot of harm. It's not taking human nature into account. And it is a kind of Gnosticism, it's a Gnosticism meaning a split. It's not open to the transcendent because the God, if there is a God, is so indifferent that all we have is we can just do all of our politics and all of our policy just in this frame, this immanent frame that we live in. And I think that's having a lot of negative, very dangerous ramifications around society. So I would second what your point there very much.
Yes, I think this is where it is important for us to bring a Catholic Orthodox perspective into politics, economics, family life, sexual morality, personal property morality, all these areas. And I think, something that I had read, I think it was from C.S. Lewis, way back in the 70s, that for every 2 modern books he ever read, he always would read an ancient book. You cannot do well to focus only on modern books because the past is the only way to get perspective on the present. Doesn't mean you always agree with the past, but you need to read the past to get perspective on modernity. But likewise, I did this when I was writing my book on the New Age movement. I read the New Age literature. I read their books. But for every 2 wackadoodle New Age books I read, I would always read something by one of the saints, preferably from the fathers. I would go back and read those ancient fathers of the church, so that I would constantly go back to my Catholic faith to get perspective on the nonsense that was being promoted by these folks.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's exactly right. I think that again, going back to where we began the discussion, it's that ignorance of the past that makes us fall prey to any new idea that comes in and looks very attractive. And now the great revolution is going to happen, and now humanity will finally be free because we have these great new ideas. It's the perspective of the past can give you a discerning eye to say, maybe not so fast. We've seen this before. So that, I think, it's a good lesson for all of us, because it's hard, especially in today's day and age, the 24-hour news cycle, and it feels like we're in this eternal now, and we're losing touch with the past and the way we teach things, our education system, totally severing us from any connection to what our ancestors in the faith would wrestle with, who can share with us. So there's work to be done in recovering, I think, this wisdom. These very same debates that transpired hundreds of years ago, over and over again, we can gain a lot of wisdom by looking back. I find. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, just to underline it, we live at a time when our schools are not teaching American history, yet alone church history. And what they learn about the founding of the United States is often such phony baloney, ideological nonsense, rather than the actual facts. And I urge people, read the early documents of the founding of the country, the early histories of the individuals. Learn about them. Learn about the actual saints, and not what fake people are telling you the saints said. I'll never forget, some New Agers had said, well, St. Thomas said that women were basically defective men. He was actually quoting Gnostics, and he refuted that. But the wackadoodle New Agers were saying that this is what Thomas taught. Yeah, he taught it in the sense that he put it in his book to disagree with. That's why we have to go back to original sources and read the actual facts. And I appreciate the kind of work that you did in this documentary. We have about a minute or so left. Any final comments?
No, it's been a great to work with EWTN on this. I think it's very important. I think it's incredibly important right now for the reasons we've spoken about. And so this is a documentary. It's only 27 minutes, but it's a bit of a taste, and encourage people to go beyond just the taste of this, but then to go and do some reading on their own, because it requires more than just watching a short piece. It's a window into a whole realm of very, very rich material that I think has tremendous relevance for today, as we've said. So I appreciate the opportunity and to be here and talk with you, and to all of EWTN for giving us the opportunity to put this documentary together.
And I would urge our readers, if you want to know more about this, you can go to our documents library at EWTN.com. Go to the document library, to the patristic site. You can download for free all of St. Irenaeus' work and St. Hippolytus and others. Thank you very much, Tim, for being with us. We've run out of time. May Almighty God bless you and bless all of our viewers, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I want just to let our folks know that you could do this with EWTN because of the support of our viewers. We try to make the faith available to you. So please continue to keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill. And as a result, we will be able to pay all of our bills too. God bless you all, and thank you, Tim.